Her dad wasn't supposed to be mine, but every time he looked at me, the world felt like it stopped. It started on a lazy summer afternoon in our small town, where everyone knew everyone, and secrets rarely stayed hidden. I was 17, tangled in the usual chaos of high school, homework, gossip, and endless days at the local cafe where my best friend, Lily, and I spent most of our afternoons. She had the kind of laughter that made people lean in, wanting to be part of it, and I loved her like a sister. But her dad, he was another story entirely. His name was Mark. Tall, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world, and eyes that could see right through the walls I'd built around myself. I had known him forever, of course. He was Lily's dad, which meant I'd always seen him as this untouchable figure, safe, protective, and completely off limits. I had spent years thinking of him in that exact way, the steady presence in the background of my life, someone I admired from a distance, someone who existed in a space I was never meant to enter. Until the day everything shifted. It was one of those golden summer afternoons when the air feels thick with possibility and everything smells just a little sweeter than usual. Lily's backyard was alive with the sound of laughter, sizzling grills, and the faint hum of cicadas hidden in the oak trees. The sun was low, casting long, warm shadows across the grass, streaking the wooden deck with light that danced with every leaf that moved in the breeze. I was helping clean up, stacking plates, gathering napkins, and dodging the random dog that had taken an interest in the leftover food. I was barely paying attention to the people around me, lost in the rhythm of chores and small talk, when he appeared. Mark. Standing in the doorway like he had stepped out of a dream, his tall frame outlined by the dying sunlight, casting a halo around him that made the whole world feel unreal. Our eyes met for the briefest second, and my chest skipped a beat. Not just a normal skip, like a hammering, a frantic stutter that seemed to echo in my ears louder than the laughter and music around us. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the sun, maybe, or my imagination being cruel. But the pull, the gravity of that single look, was undeniable. He smiled then. A small, subtle smile, not exaggerated, not forced. Just there. And in that smile, there was something that didn't belong in the untouchable dad category. Something human. Something dangerous. My stomach twisted. I wanted to look away, to tell myself I wasn't reading too much into it, but I couldn't. Not yet. I felt frozen, suspended in a moment that wasn't supposed to exist. Could you grab me that plate over there? Lily's voice broke through the haze, and I jumped slightly, aware that my hands were shaking more than usual. I glanced back at Mark, and he was gone, or maybe he had just turned away. I wasn't sure. But the echo of his presence lingered, like the heat left behind by a flame long after it's gone. The thing about Mark was that he had this way of noticing the smallest details, the things no one else saw. I remember later that evening, while I was helping Lily clear glasses into the kitchen, he appeared at the doorway again. This time, closer. And I could feel the tension, the unspoken words, hanging between us. "You're working too hard," he said, voice calm, warm, but carrying a kind of authority that made me tense without meaning to. "I like helping," I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was racing so fast I thought he could hear it. He nodded slowly, as if weighing my words. "That's good, just don't lose yourself in it." And then he left again, like a shadow slipping back into the background. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being noticed. Really noticed. And that feeling, it was addictive. Over the next few days, every time I saw him, every time he walked past me at the grocery store or at Lily's house, I felt it, the pull of something forbidden, something I shouldn't want but did anyway. I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before, the way his hands moved when he cooked, the soft crease of his brow when he was concentrating, the low, almost imperceptible laugh he let slip when Lily made a joke. Each detail felt like a brush against my own skin, igniting little fires I didn't know I could feel. It wasn't just attraction, it was obsession. And obsession was dangerous, especially when it involved someone like Mark. Someone who belonged to Lily, someone who should have been completely untouchable. I hated myself for thinking about him so much, for feeling the way I did. And yet, I couldn't stop. Then came the stolen moments, the subtle ones that made everything feel like a tightrope walk. A brief brush of hands when passing dishes. A glance that lingered a heartbeat too long. A quiet word in the kitchen while Lily ran errands. Each one felt like the smallest act of rebellion, a thrill I couldn't let myself admit I craved. I would lie awake at night, replaying every look, every word, every fleeting touch, and wonder if he was feeling the same thing, or if it was all in my head. There were moments when it was almost unbearable, moments where the line between friendship and desire blurred so completely that I didn't know how to exist in the world without thinking about him. I would catch myself staring at him during family dinners, my chest tightening with every laugh he shared with Lily, and hating myself for the jealousy that rose like poison in my veins. I hated how much I wanted him. Hated how much I needed him, even though he was off limits. One afternoon, I found myself alone in Lily's garage, helping her with some project. And then he was there, stepping in to check on something, the sunlight catching in his hair, dust motes floating in the air around him like tiny sparks. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, tall and calm, watching me struggle with a heavy box. And I thought, maybe this was it, the moment everything would tip over. "Here," he said softly, reaching to take the box from me. Our hands brushed, and the world shifted. I felt his warmth radiate into my skin, his fingers lingering just a second longer than they needed to. "Thanks," I muttered, voice barely audible, my heart hammering. His eyes met mine, dark and steady. "Be careful," he said. And there it was again, the pull, the forbidden tension that made everything inside me ache. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern repeated itself. I found excuses to see him, to linger in the same spaces. Every laugh shared, every casual touch became loaded with meaning. I started imagining moments that could never exist, lunches alone together, walks in the park, quiet evenings just the two of us. And every time, I caught myself thinking, this is impossible. It can't happen. And yet. And then came the moment that terrified me the most, when Lily's dad actually noticed me. Not just noticed, but truly saw me. It happened at the local park, where Lily and I sometimes sat for hours just talking about life, the world, everything we couldn't tell anyone else. He had come to meet us, walking across the grass with a casual stride that made my chest ache for reasons I didn't want to admit. "Hey," he said, voice low, casual, but there was a softness in his tone that made me shiver. "Hi," I said, pretending to focus on the book in my lap. But my eyes kept flicking up, and he caught me. And just like that, my carefully maintained distance crumbled. "Do you come here often?" he asked, a playful lilt to his voice, though I could hear the caution beneath it. I swallowed hard. "Sometimes. With Lily." "Right," he said, but the faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth told me he knew it wasn't that simple. And it wasn't. It had never been that simple. Every glance, every shared space, every accidental touch between us carried weight. Weight that neither of us could acknowledge, weight that neither of us could escape. And yet, despite the danger, despite the forbidden nature of it all, there was a thrill I couldn't resist. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing I could fall, and feeling my heart leap anyway. I kept thinking about the moment at the barbecue, the first spark, and how it had grown into something that consumed me. How every time he appeared in my life, the world felt brighter, heavier, sharper, all at once. And I knew, with a clarity that terrified me, that I was falling. Falling for her dad, the one person in the world I was never supposed to want. I didn't know then how dangerous that pull would become, how much it would change everything, or how impossible it would feel to hold on to the pieces of my life that still made sense. But in that moment, under the soft summer light, with the smell of grass and sun and something else I couldn't name in the air, all I knew was this: I couldn't stop. Not my heart. Not my mind. Not my every thought that seemed to orbit around him like a satellite I couldn't escape. And the worst part? I wasn't sure he could stop either. Over the next few weeks, it felt like he was everywhere, though of course, he wasn't literally following me. It was just that suddenly, the world seemed smaller, like our paths were destined to cross no matter where I went. I saw him at the grocery store, stacking cans like a pro, moving with that quiet, deliberate grace that made everything else in the store fade into the background. I caught myself pretending to browse the cereal aisle when really, I was watching him, noting the way his fingers lingered on the labels, the subtle crease in his brow as he focused. Every little detail was a punch to my chest because I couldn't unsee it. By the library, he was there again. He stood at the far end, a tall shadow among the shelves, thumbing through a worn hardcover. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, catching his hair in the softest halo, and for a second, I thought he looked like he belonged in a painting, untouchable and perfect. I reminded myself to look away. I reminded myself to breathe. But instead, I found my gaze glued to him, heart hammering like a drum I couldn't quiet. Even the park where Lily and I spent hours talking about nothing, long, rambling conversations about school, dreams, and silly gossip, had turned into a minefield. Every time he walked past, casually jogging or walking his dog, my chest tightened. My thoughts spiraled into places I wasn't supposed to go, imagining what it would feel like if he stopped just for me. If his eyes lingered a fraction longer than politeness allowed. And somehow, impossibly, it seemed like sometimes they did. He didn't talk much, and yet every word that did escape his lips felt like a jolt straight through me. A simple, "good morning," or a nod in my direction sent my stomach fluttering like I had swallowed butterflies. His voice carried weight, calm, deep, steady, but also something softer beneath it, a vulnerability he didn't show anyone else. And when he laughed, even at the smallest joke, it was like the world shifted on its axis. I hated that it affected me so much. I hated how vulnerable it made me feel. But even more than that, I hated myself for wanting more. And then there was jealousy. I had never been so acutely aware of it in my life. Every time another woman walked past him, laughed at something he said, or even smiled in his direction, my chest constricted as though someone had squeezed it too tightly. My stomach twisted into knots I couldn't untangle. Sometimes I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was normal, harmless even. But I knew better. This wasn't normal. I was falling in love with her dad, and it scared me more than I could put into words. I hated myself for feeling it. Hated the way my body responded to him in ways I didn't understand. Hated the way my mind raced whenever he appeared, thinking of scenarios I knew I couldn't ever act on. And yet, I couldn't stop. Not when my heart had made its choice without asking for permission. Not when every glance, every subtle interaction, every accidental brush of hands left me aching in a way I couldn't explain. Then came the rainy afternoon that changed everything. The sky had opened up suddenly, turning the streets into slick, reflective ribbons of gray. The storm was fierce, drumming against rooftops and windows like a warning I didn't understand yet. I ducked into the little cafe on the corner, shaking raindrops from my hair and clothes, hoping to find a quiet spot to collect myself. And there he was. Mark. Sitting alone at a small corner table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, the rain plastering strands of his hair to his forehead. The sight of him, so familiar yet impossible, made my pulse spike. I wanted to turn around and leave, to pretend I hadn't noticed him, but my feet betrayed me. They moved forward of their own accord, dragging me into the storm of tension and longing that had been simmering for weeks. We sat across from each other in silence, the kind of silence that feels louder than any conversation could be. The rain hammered the windows, and the cafe smelled like wet pavement and roasted coffee beans, a mixture so grounding yet suffocating, making my senses sharpen until every detail was unbearable. Steam rose from our cups, curling into the air between us like a delicate, fragile barrier. I could feel his warmth radiating across the table, a physical pull that made every nerve in my body tense and ache. And then it happened. Our hands brushed. Not intentionally, of course, but the contact was electric. It was a spark that didn't just linger in my skin but shot straight to my chest, leaving my heart pounding and my thoughts scattered. Time seemed to freeze. The cafe, the rain, the other patrons, all of it disappeared until it was just the two of us, bound together in that fleeting, forbidden moment. "I shouldn't," he murmured, voice trembling ever so slightly, a vulnerability I had never heard before. And just like that, my mind went blank. My body wanted to reach for him. My voice wanted to tell him everything I had never dared to say. My soul screamed that I was already lost. I know, I whispered back, words barely audible over the patter of rain. But inside, I wanted nothing more than to tell him that I didn't care. That I wanted him. That all the rules, all the boundaries, all the consequences, none of it mattered when every fiber of me was drawn to him. The moments stretched, unbearable and electric. Each second felt like a lifetime, and every nerve ending in my body buzzed with tension. I could see it in his eyes, the same pull, the same hesitation. He was trying to hold back, trying to protect something, maybe me, maybe himself, maybe our fragile friendship with Lily that neither of us could risk shattering. And yet, in that shared silence, there was a promise, unspoken and dangerous, that neither of us wanted to acknowledge but both of us couldn't resist. Every detail of that cafe became etched into my memory. The way the raindrops streaked down the window in erratic lines, mirroring the chaos I felt inside. The faint smell of wet asphalt that seeped through the door, mingling with the rich aroma of coffee. The warmth radiating from his body, the subtle rise and fall of his chest as he tried to control his breathing, the tremor in his fingers as they hovered near mine. It was intoxicating, suffocating, and addictively forbidden. I wanted to reach across the table and hold his hand properly, to let him know that I had wanted this, maybe for longer than I even knew. But the words lodged in my throat, and the guilt sat heavy on my chest like a stone. He was her dad. He was my best friend's father. And yet, in that moment, all the logic in the world couldn't stop the way my heart was screaming. He shifted slightly, avoiding my gaze for a moment, and I thought I might collapse from the sheer intensity of wanting him so desperately and knowing it could never be. Then, he leaned back just enough to give himself space, a space that felt like a lifetime between us. And in that space, I realized something terrifying: the pull between us wasn't going to disappear. It wasn't going to fade quietly into the background of our everyday lives. It was here, alive, persistent, and impossible to ignore. And with that realization came panic. Panic mixed with longing, panic mixed with something darker, fear of what would happen if Lily ever found out, fear of what it meant for me, for him, for everything I thought I understood about right and wrong. I wanted him, yes, but I also wanted to survive this without destroying the life I had built alongside my best friend. The cafe grew quieter as the storm outside continued, a heavy, rhythmic reminder of the tension that had taken root between us. Every time his fingers twitched near mine, my heart did a somersault. Every subtle shift of his posture, every soft intake of breath, made me painfully aware that this attraction was no longer a secret, at least not to my own heart. "I shouldn't," he said again, voice low, almost a whisper this time, and it was like a dagger twisting in my chest. I wanted to say yes, I wanted to say everything, but all I could do was meet his eyes and let the silence scream for both of us. The storm outside raged on, but inside, in that tiny cafe, it was a different kind of storm. One of stolen glances, unspoken confessions, and the heavy weight of forbidden desire. And for the first time, I realized that no matter what I tried, no matter how much I told myself to walk away, part of me had already crossed the line. The pull was too strong. The tension too thick. The longing too deep. And in that moment, as the rain blurred the world outside the window and the smell of coffee filled every corner of my senses, I understood something terrifyingly simple: my heart didn't care about rules. It didn't care about boundaries. It didn't care that he was her dad. All it cared about was him, and the dangerous, irresistible, utterly forbidden pull that had been growing between us for weeks, now impossible to deny. Weeks passed, and what had started as subtle glances and accidental touches blossomed into something deeper, something dangerous, intoxicating, impossible to resist. Our secret moments multiplied in ways that both thrilled and terrified me. A brush of his hand on my shoulder when he handed me a plate of food. A lingering look across the kitchen counter while Lily was distracted by something trivial. Quick touches that sent electricity through my veins, leaving me flushed and trembling long after he had walked away. Each time, I told myself it was nothing. That it didn't matter. But deep down, I knew I was lying. Every heartbeat betrayed me. Every time he laughed at something I said, that small, rare acknowledgement, I felt my chest tighten, as though he had unlocked a part of me I hadn't realized existed. I was seen in ways no one else had ever looked at me, not my friends, not my family, not even myself. And yet, the knowledge that Lily's father was the one opening that door filled me with a delicious, painful guilt. Even our text conversations became a minefield of emotion. Late-night messages that started innocently, questions about homework, mundane chatter about movies or music, soon drifted into territory that neither of us dared to name aloud. I felt my pulse race every time my phone buzzed, hoping it was him, knowing it was him, and dreading the flood of feelings his words would stir. He was careful, never overt, never crossing a line that could ruin everything, but every carefully chosen word, every subtle hint of concern or teasing, felt like a secret confession. And yet, despite all the careful boundaries, something between us had shifted irrevocably. I couldn't stop thinking about him, couldn't stop imagining the stolen moments that existed only when no one else was watching. I would replay his expressions, the curve of his smile, the way his eyes lingered on me for just a moment too long, over and over in my mind until it became a kind of obsession I couldn't escape. But as exhilarating as it was also a terrifying tightrope walk. Every step, every smile, every accidental brush of fingers was a risk. And then, suddenly, the world as I knew it came crashing down. The twist, the one moment that shattered the fragile balance we had created, arrived without warning, like a thunderclap on a quiet night. It was a Thursday evening, just after dinner. Lily and I had been lounging in her room, scrolling through our phones and sharing the usual stories, the trivial jokes, the easy laughter that marked the comfort of years of friendship. I had left my phone on her desk while getting a glass of water, forgetting, as always, that small, careless mistakes could have monumental consequences. And that's when she saw it. Her eyes fell on my screen, just a single notification flashing across the lock screen, a message from him. Just one message. One innocuous string of words, really, a simple check-in about a book we'd both been reading, nothing overt. But in Lily's eyes, it was enough. The instant she saw it, the shift in her expression froze me in place. Her eyes widened. Mouth trembling. Hands gripping the edge of her desk as if she were trying to hold herself together. "Why are you texting him like that?" she demanded, voice tight and unsteady, the tremor in her tone slicing straight through my chest. I froze. My stomach dropped to my feet. My mind scrambled for explanations that wouldn't exist, that weren't ready to be spoken. It's not what it looks like," I stammered, words falling flat, heavy, useless. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears, small and panicked. But she didn't hear me. Or maybe she didn't want to hear me. The air between us thickened instantly, turning suffocating. Betrayal hung heavy, palpable, a weight pressing down on my shoulders so fiercely that I felt as if I might collapse. Her gaze wasn't just questioning, it was accusing. And in that accusation, I heard all the judgment I feared. Her dad, Mark, had been trying to protect me all along. I realized that in that moment. The careful distance he had maintained, the small retreats whenever our connection grew too intense, the subtle pushback when I caught him looking at me too long, all of it had been an act of protection. And now, that fragile shield had shattered because one small message had been seen by the person I cared for most. It's not what you think," I tried again, swallowing the lump in my throat. But she didn't respond, didn't soften, didn't give me a single thread to hold on to. The silence that stretched between us was worse than the anger, worse than the judgment. It was the void of unspoken truths, of possibilities lost, of innocence shattered in a heartbeat. My mind raced. How had it come to this? How had a simple message, something so carefully worded, grown into a betrayal that threatened everything? I thought of the countless hours spent in stolen moments, the laughter shared in whispers, the electric tension that had made my pulse skip. And now it all seemed like a crime, like some forbidden act that could never be forgiven. Lily's eyes were wide, hurt, confused, and angry all at once. I wanted to explain, to unravel the complexity of what had been happening in the shadows, but the words felt trapped in my throat. Every attempt at an explanation sounded hollow, inadequate, insufficient to convey the depth of my feelings and the tangled web we had woven. Her dad had been trying to protect me too. I remembered the way he had subtly pushed me away the week before, the way he had avoided certain topics, avoided lingering glances, as if he could sense the danger of what was developing. And now, I understood the weight he had been carrying silently, the burden of wanting something forbidden yet knowing it could destroy everything. The room seemed to tilt around me. The walls of Lily's bedroom, once safe and comforting, now felt like a cage. Every familiar detail, the posters on the wall, the soft carpet under my feet, the clutter of clothes and books, suddenly became suffocating, like they were pressing in to remind me that there was no place to hide from the truth. I hated how much I loved him. I hated the way my heart ached at the thought of him looking at me the way he sometimes did when we were alone. And yet, I couldn't stop. I couldn't turn it off. And now, confronted by the raw, unfiltered gaze of my best friend, I realized that love was no longer a private, manageable secret. It had grown into something public, undeniable, and explosive. Her voice broke the silence again, trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, almost accusing, almost pleading. The words felt like knives twisting in my chest. I wanted to say everything, to spill the truth, to let her understand the depth of what had been happening, but I knew that even the truth would hurt. Truth, in this case, was sharp and cutting, a double-edged sword that could wound all three of us. I couldn't even meet her eyes. I stared at the floor, at the familiar scuff marks in the carpet, at the edge of the rug where the fibers had frayed. My hands fidgeted, twisting in my lap, and I felt the weight of every stolen smile, every whispered conversation, every forbidden look pressing down on me like a stone. Betrayal hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Not just betrayal of Lily, but betrayal of the life I had thought I understood. Of the trust we had shared, the years of friendship, the laughter, the secrets that had always been ours. And now, in a single moment, it was all threatened. Her dad had been trying to protect me, to shield me from my own feelings, from the impossible consequences of a love that could never exist publicly. And yet, that protection had failed, broken by something as simple, as mundane, as a message. I felt the panic rising in my chest, a wave of fear and longing and helplessness that made it hard to breathe. I hated how powerless I felt. Hated how much I wanted him, how much I craved the stolen moments we had shared. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop, even knowing the damage it could cause. Even knowing that the fragile bond with Lily, the one person I had promised myself I would never hurt, was now dangling by a thread. And then the silence stretched, unbearable. Lily's eyes softened just slightly, but there was still hurt there, still confusion, still a question I couldn't answer without revealing everything. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't about betraying her, that it wasn't about hurting anyone, it was about feelings that had grown too fast, too deep, too uncontrollable. But even as I thought it, I realized the truth: some things, once begun, cannot be undone. The message, innocent in intention, had lit a fire that could not be contained. It had exposed the invisible threads of desire, connection, and danger that had been woven in secret between her father and me. And now, standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be safe, I knew one thing with horrifying clarity: nothing could go back to the way it was. Not Lily. Not her dad. Not me. Not any of us. And in that heavy, suffocating silence, I felt the first tremors of a fear that would not leave me for weeks to come, the fear that everything I had wanted, everything I had dreamed, might be lost forever because of one simple, fleeting, undeniable truth. The breakdown was unbearable. Every day felt heavier than the one before. Lily didn't speak to me for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was only days. Each morning I would wake up with a knot in my stomach, dread curling around my chest like a living thing. I couldn't go to her house without feeling a tight ball of panic twist in my gut. Every text I sent was left unread, every call ignored, and every glance at my phone filled me with a helpless kind of longing that made my fingers ache. And Mark, seeing him became its own kind of torture. I couldn't look at him without guilt twisting inside me, coiling itself into every beat of my heart. Every time our eyes met across a room, I wanted to look away but couldn't. I wanted to apologize, to explain, to beg him not to hate me, not to be disappointed, but the words stuck in my throat like stones. I felt small, broken, and unbearably exposed. We met once under the old oak tree where we had sat as kids, long before the tension, long before the longing, long before everything had gone so dangerously sideways. The leaves swayed gently in the summer breeze, casting dappled shadows across the grass. It should have felt comforting, a safe memory from simpler times, but it didn't. Not now. He stood there, his tall frame hunched slightly, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. The sunlight caught in his hair, dust motes dancing like tiny fireflies around him. "I didn't want this to hurt anyone," he said finally, voice low, trembling with regret. Every word was heavy, saturated with all the unspoken feelings between us. I nodded, my throat tight, tears stinging my eyes. "I know," I whispered. And it wasn't enough. It never would be enough. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I was sorry too, that none of this had been intentional, but even those words seemed meaningless in the weight of what we had done. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I felt the ache of longing in every fiber of my body, and yet, I also felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. We had crossed lines that should never have been crossed, and even in our shared understanding, there was no comfort, only the raw awareness of the damage done, the fragility of trust shattered. After that meeting, I retreated into myself. The days blurred into one another, each one heavier than the last. I spent hours lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Why was I like this? Why had I let myself fall for him, someone forbidden, someone untouchable, someone I was never meant to love? Why did my heart insist on what my mind screamed was impossible? I questioned everything about myself. Was it weakness? Was it reckless foolishness? Or was it something deeper, an unexplainable gravity that pulled me toward him despite every warning, every consequence, every piece of logic I clung to? I wrestled with my own reflection, asking over and over, am I capable of love without losing myself? Am I worth loving if this is what I want? Every familiar place felt haunted. The park where Lily and I had spent endless hours talking, laughing, dreaming, it now carried the ghost of every glance, every brush of hands, every unspoken confession. The cafe where we had sat through that storm, the smell of coffee and wet asphalt still clung to my memory like a phantom, a reminder of desire mingled with guilt. Even Lily's bedroom, once my sanctuary, now felt like a courtroom where my every thought was judged, my every intention dissected. The weight of secrecy, the burden of desire, the ache of unfulfilled longing, it all came crashing down. I felt lost, untethered, a ship adrift in an ocean of emotions too powerful to navigate alone. I wanted to reach for him, to feel the comfort of his presence, to share just one laugh or one whispered word, but I couldn't. Every step toward him felt like stepping onto a cliff's edge, knowing the fall could destroy everything I had left. And yet, slowly, imperceptibly, healing began. Not with grand gestures, not with sudden breakthroughs, but with the quiet, steady work of reclaiming myself. It started with small things, choosing to eat when I was hungry, stepping outside to feel the sun on my face, taking deep breaths that filled my lungs instead of my mind with panic. I began to pay attention to the little moments that reminded me I was alive beyond this obsession, beyond this forbidden longing. I started to journal again, writing my thoughts and feelings in messy scrawls that no one would ever read. Words became a balm, a way to untangle the knots in my mind, to name the chaos that had taken over my heart. I wrote about him, yes, but not with desire alone. I wrote about my fears, my mistakes, my grief, my guilt. I wrote about the longing that had consumed me and the strength it had taken just to survive each day. Therapy became my sanctuary, too, not formal, not clinical, but honest conversations with someone who asked the right questions and let me speak without judgment. What do you need? They asked. What do you want for yourself? And for the first time in weeks, I had to stop and think. Not about him. Not about Lily. Not about what I had done or what I had lost, but about me. About what I deserved. About what love should feel like if it was healthy, if it was nurturing, if it respected boundaries and honored truth. I began to see that love wasn't about perfection or rules. It wasn't about secrecy or guilt or stolen moments hidden in shadows. Love was messy, yes, but it was also about honesty. About daring to feel fully, even when it scared you. About recognizing the weight of your choices, taking responsibility for the impact on yourself and others, and still moving forward with integrity. I learned to value myself. To recognize that my needs mattered. That my boundaries were not negotiable. That my heart, while wild and impulsive, deserved care and respect. And slowly, quietly, that realization began to shift the pain into something I could bear. It didn't erase the longing, didn't erase the memories, didn't erase the ache, but it gave me strength. I started to reclaim ordinary joys that had once seemed lost. I walked in the park alone, noticing the way the sunlight fell on the grass, the way the breeze carried the scent of flowers, the way the world moved around me even if my heart still throbbed with memory. I laughed at jokes that had nothing to do with him, read books that had no hidden meanings, and learned to savor moments without the constant tension of forbidden desire. Even seeing Mark became easier, not without pain, not without a pang of what I could not have, but without the suffocating guilt that had once made my chest ache. We could be in the same space without the unspoken words becoming a chain around my ribs. I had begun to separate the intensity of desire from the reality of life, to accept that some loves were meant to teach us, not to consume us. I allowed myself to forgive, not him, not Lily, not even the situation, but myself. To forgive my heart for wanting what it shouldn't, to forgive my mind for failing to control it, to forgive my body for responding in ways that felt uncontrollable. And in that forgiveness, I discovered a fragile kind of freedom. A freedom that didn't erase the past but let me breathe in the present. And then, slowly, I realized something miraculous: love could survive honesty. It could survive patience. It could survive waiting. It could exist even if it had to pause, even if it had to transform into something quieter, something safer, something that honored the lives of the people around it. I realized that love wasn't about immediate fulfillment or reckless abandon. It was about truth, about clarity, about the courage to face feelings without letting them destroy you, or anyone else. I began to see him differently, not through the haze of obsession, not through the lens of stolen moments, but as a person with his own desires, his own fears, his own struggles. I recognized the care he had taken, the restraint, the silent protection he had offered, and I felt gratitude where once there had been only longing. Healing came slowly, sometimes imperceptibly. There were moments of setback, of tears, of feeling the old ache resurface when a memory, a glance, a phrase brought everything rushing back. But each time, I reminded myself, I was stronger now. I was wiser. I could acknowledge my feelings without letting them define me. I could honor my heart without surrendering to chaos. And in that quiet, steady rhythm of recovery, I understood something profound. That the ache of forbidden love, the heartbreak, the guilt, it all had meaning. It had taught me resilience, self-awareness, and the depth of my own capacity to feel. That love, even when complicated and impossible, could teach us how to love ourselves. One evening, I returned to the old oak tree, not to confront him, not to relive the pain, but to sit with the wind through the branches and the soft light of the setting sun. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me without panic, without shame. And in that moment, I understood that healing was not a destination but a process. That it was okay to carry the lessons of love forward, even if the heart remained tender, even if the desire lingered in quiet, respectful ways. I had survived the storm, the guilt, the heartbreak. I had emerged with a clearer understanding of who I was, what I wanted, and what I deserved. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace that wasn't tied to him, or Lily, or the mistakes we had made, but to me. My heart had learned, my spirit had grown, and my sense of self-worth had been restored. And in that restoration, I found hope. Hope that love, when approached with honesty and integrity, could endure even the harshest trials. Hope that hearts could be true without being reckless, that desire could exist without destruction. Hope that, someday, what had been forbidden could transform into something sustainable, meaningful, and beautiful, whether together or apart. The reunion, when it finally happened, felt like the world itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this exact moment. The golden summer sky stretched above me, just as it had the first day I realized the truth of what I felt, warm, glowing, and impossibly beautiful. There were no fireworks, no dramatic music playing in the background, no cinematic confession that would sweep the entire world off its feet. It was simple, quiet, intimate, perfect in its own way. He stood there, leaning against the old oak tree that had become a witness to our entire story, the one that had seen our childhood laughter, our whispered secrets, our stolen glances, and now, our moment of truth. The breeze stirred the leaves gently, carrying with it the faint scent of cut grass and summer flowers, mingling with the warmth of the late afternoon sun. The same sun that had once outlined his tall frame in a golden halo, the same one that had set my heart racing and made the impossible feel just a little bit closer to real. I felt my pulse quicken as I approached, every step measured, careful, as though I were tiptoeing through fragile glass. The months of silence, of heartbreak, of longing, had left their marks, etched into every fiber of my being. I could still feel the ache of the days Lily hadn't spoken to me, the guilt that had twisted through my chest every time I saw him. And yet, standing here now, I realized that ache had not been in vain. It had taught me something essential about love, about boundaries, about patience, and about truth. His eyes found mine, steady, searching, filled with all the unspoken words and lingering feelings that neither of us had dared voice. There was hesitation there, yes, but also relief, recognition, a quiet kind of hope that had grown in the spaces where fear and longing had collided. He didn't speak at first, just let the silence stretch, letting the moment breathe, letting us both feel the weight of everything we had been through. "I don't want to hide anymore," I whispered finally, voice trembling just enough to betray the storm of emotions roiling beneath the surface. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a plea. It was a declaration of self, of heart, of courage. It was the acknowledgement that I had lived too long in shadows, letting fear dictate the rhythm of my life, letting guilt and secrecy keep me from the truth I had been holding on to for months. He took a step closer, the distance between us shrinking until it felt like the space itself had been waiting for our proximity. His voice was soft, low, trembling with the same mixture of longing and restraint I had felt for so long. "Then we won't," he said, letting each word fall like a promise. "Not from ourselves." It wasn't a fairy tale moment, the kind you read about in books or see in movies. There was no sweeping orchestral music, no sudden downpour, no dramatic declaration to the world. There was just the simple truth of us, standing together, breathing in the same warm summer air, hearts finally aligned in the same unspoken rhythm. And in that truth, something beautiful unfolded. The forbidden, all the tension, the fear, the guilt, it melted into something tender, something honest. Not perfect, not easy, but real. It was the kind of love that demanded patience, demanded care, demanded courage, and we had both survived long enough, grown enough, to understand that. Every heartbeat, every glance, every stolen moment had led us here, to this fragile, beautiful equilibrium where desire and respect, longing and integrity, could coexist. I reached out, my fingers brushing against his, tentative at first, savoring the electricity that had always sparked between us without letting it consume us. His hand met mine, warm, firm, reassuring. The gesture was small, ordinary even, yet monumental in what it symbolized. It wasn't just about holding hands, it was about holding on to truth, holding on to each other, and holding on to the courage to face a world that might never fully understand what we had. We stood like that for a long moment, letting the golden sunlight wrap around us like a protective cloak. I could feel every detail, the warmth of his skin, the slight tremor of his fingers, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat under my palm. And in that rhythm, I felt a kind of healing, a quiet affirmation that the pain, the guilt, the months of emotional turmoil had all been a necessary journey to reach this clarity. He leaned just slightly, close enough that I could feel his breath, soft and steady, against my cheek. "I was afraid," he admitted, almost inaudible, afraid that wanting this would ruin everything. "I know," I whispered back, voice shaking. "I was too." The honesty of it, the shared vulnerability, was intoxicating. We didn't need to elaborate, didn't need grand gestures or dramatic confessions. The moment itself spoke volumes. It was in the way he held my hand, the way our shoulders brushed, the way our eyes remained locked even as the world moved around us. It was in the quiet understanding that neither of us would take this lightly, that neither of us would rush, that both of us had learned the lessons that made this possible. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe fully. The weight of secrecy lifted slightly, replaced by the warm, steady pulse of hope. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't careless, and it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The love that had once been dangerous, forbidden, and terrifying had transformed into something delicate, something beautiful, something worth protecting. We spent the afternoon under that oak tree, talking in whispers, laughing quietly, letting the sun wash over us like a benediction. Every memory of stolen touches, lingering glances, and secret messages seemed to culminate in this moment, a moment where the past and the future coexisted in a kind of harmonious tension. I realized that sometimes, the most dangerous loves, the ones that make your chest ache and your mind spin, are the ones that are worth the risk. And as we sat there, the golden light turning amber with the approach of evening, I understood something profound. Falling for him, even though it had never been part of the plan, had become the only plan I wanted to follow. It wasn't about defying rules, ignoring boundaries, or courting chaos. It was about embracing the truth of my own heart, about acknowledging desire without shame, and about choosing honesty above fear. In the quiet moments, I found clarity. I understood that love wasn't a straight line, wasn't a tidy path free of obstacles. It was messy, unpredictable, and often terrifying. But it was also transformative, expansive, and capable of teaching lessons no other experience could offer. I had learned about patience, about courage, about self-respect. I had learned that boundaries could coexist with desire, that honesty could coexist with longing, and that love could endure even when the odds were stacked against it. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known for months. We didn't need to rush. We didn't need to prove anything to anyone. We simply needed to exist in this truth, together, fully present, fully honest, fully alive. Our hands remained intertwined, a symbol of the journey we had taken, the stolen moments, the heartbreak, the guilt, the healing, and finally, the reunion. Each heartbeat resonated with history, with tension, with hope. Every glance reaffirmed that what we had was rare, precious, and worth protecting. The world outside could judge, misunderstand, or disapprove, but under that golden sky, it didn't matter. What mattered was us, and the honesty we had finally chosen to embrace. And in that honesty, I found freedom. Freedom to love without guilt, freedom to feel without fear, freedom to follow a heart that had led me through shadows and into sunlight. It was a freedom hard-earned, a freedom tender, a freedom that came not from recklessness but from growth, patience, and unwavering truth. We lingered there as the evening deepened, watching the sky shift from gold to amber to dusky rose. I realized that life, like love, didn't always offer grand resolutions. Sometimes it offered quiet moments, fleeting yet infinite in their meaning. Moments that could heal, restore, and transform. Moments that reminded you that even when everything seemed impossible, love, true, honest, patient love, could find its way. And as I looked at him, really looked, I understood the depth of what we had survived. The heartbreak, the guilt, the longing, it had all been a crucible, shaping us, refining us, preparing us for this exact instant. And in this instant, under the golden summer sky, I could finally let go of fear, let go of shame, and simply exist in the reality of what we had discovered together. Because falling for him, even when it had never been part of the plan, was no longer a mistake. It was a choice, a conscious decision to honor the truth of my heart. And as we sat together, hands entwined, shadows stretching long across the grass, I knew that for the first time in months, I was exactly where I needed to be. Every heartbeat, every glance, every stolen moment had led to this realization: the most dangerous loves are often the ones worth taking the risk for. And now, having faced the fear, the heartbreak, and the consequences, I was ready to embrace it fully, with my eyes wide open and my heart unguarded. So now, here we are, at the edge of a story that began in stolen glances and hidden messages, but has arrived at truth, honesty, and a love that, while imperfect, is undeniably ours. And I want to ask you, the viewers, to pause for a moment and think, have you ever experienced a love that terrified you, yet somehow felt inevitable? A love that made you question rules, boundaries, and the shape of your own heart? If this story made your heart race, made you sigh, or even brought a tear to your eye, let me know. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your stories, your feelings, your experiences with love that feels too dangerous to exist but too beautiful to ignore. And if you loved this narration, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that will pull you in, make you feel, and leave you thinking long after the screen goes dark. Because love, complicated, messy, forbidden, and beautiful, is the one thing that truly keeps us alive, keeps our hearts racing, and reminds us that every risk, every stolen moment, every heartbeat, is worth it when it leads to truth. And this was our truth.